In the sweltering summer of 1893, a devastating fire ripped through the opulent Scarlet Garter, a prominent brothel in Redemption Gulch, Montana. As the flames consumed the lavish structure, they revealed a chilling secret hidden within its foundation, a clandestine cellar filled with the skeletal remains of at least 92 women. Each body bore marks of extreme violence, suggesting a methodical and horrifying pattern of murder. The official investigation, initially hampered by the remote location and the town's secretive nature, quickly escalated when a retired Pinkerton agent, Samuel Silas Blackwood, happened upon the scene and recognized a grim signature that echoed a case from his past. For years, the disappearances of young women in and around Redemption Gulch had been dismissed as the unfortunate realities of frontier life, a harsh environment where opportunities were scarce and dangers plentiful. No one suspected that the town's most celebrated establishment, run by the seemingly benevolent Blackwell sisters, was at the heart of a systematic murder enterprise. Before we plunge into the chilling tale of Eleanor, Beatrice, and Ophelia Blackwell, make sure to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what frontier legend you'd like us to uncover next, because this story proves that the true monsters are often hidden in plain sight, cloaked in respectability and operating within the very fabric of society. What makes the Blackwell sisters' case even more terrifying is how they managed to operate for over 8 years without suspicion, leveraging the desperate circumstances of women on the frontier and the systemic corruption of local authorities to mask their depraved acts. They accumulated a fortune that would be worth millions in today's currency, all built upon the suffering and demise of their unsuspecting victims. The rise of Redemption Gulch, Montana, sprang into existence in 1885 following the discovery of a colossal gold nugget by prospector Silas Goldtooth Malone. The find, one of the largest in territorial history, occurred during a spring thaw when Malone, sheltering from a sudden blizzard, noticed the glittering stone exposed by the melting snow. Within months of his claim, what began as a collection of tents and crude log cabins transformed into a bustling mining town of nearly 5,000 souls, overwhelmingly men drawn by the allure of quick riches in the unforgiving Montana wilderness, where winter temperatures plummeted far below zero and summer days could be scorching. By 1887, Redemption Gulch had solidified its position as one of Montana's most prosperous mining communities. The Oro Fino mine, its economic bedrock, produced thousands of ounces of gold monthly, sustaining a complex ecosystem of businesses, services, and entertainment venues. The town's extreme isolation was, ironically, its greatest asset during the gold rush. The nearest official law enforcement post was a grueling 2-day ride through treacherous mountain passes, and territorial officials rarely ventured into such a harsh landscape unless absolutely compelled. This remoteness created an ideal breeding ground for those who wished to operate outside the established norms of law and morality. The Oro Fino mine itself operated around the clock with 3 shifts of workers toiling in tunnels that eventually reached depths of over 1,000 feet. The constant din of machinery, the pungent odor of blasting powder, and the perpetual dust in the air created an atmosphere where unusual sounds or smells from other sources could be easily dismissed or simply unnoticed. The mine employed over 1,200 workers at its peak, generating an insatiable demand for housing, food, and entertainment, making Redemption Gulch one of the most economically vibrant communities in the territory. The community that blossomed around Malone's discovery reflected the raw, untamed spirit of frontier life, but with an unusual degree of hidden organization that would later prove pivotal to our story. Main Street stretched for nearly a mile, lined with everything from hastily erected saloons to more substantial brick buildings housing the town's essential services. The Redemption Gulch Mercantile, owned by the shrewd Irish immigrant Patrick O'Malley, served as the unofficial town square where news, gossip, and rumors flowed freely. O'Malley's establishment also acted as the informal post office, bank, and communication hub, roles that would later become critical in tracing the mysterious disappearances that plagued the community. The town's demographics created a unique social structure that the Blackwell sisters would exploit with terrifying efficiency. Men outnumbered women by a staggering ratio of nearly 50-1, creating intense demand for female companionship and making women-led businesses exceptionally profitable. The handful of respectable women in town, mostly wives of mine foremen, the schoolmistress Miss Adeline Finch, a few laundresses, and occasional female relatives visiting from back east, were treated with exaggerated deference and protection. This almost sacred regard for respectable women would later provide perfect cover for the Blackwells, as community members were highly reluctant to question the activities of women who appeared to uphold moral standards in a town where such standards were often ignored. The arrival of the Blackwell sisters into this harsh but prosperous environment came the three Blackwell sisters in the spring of 1887. Arriving on the bi-weekly stagecoach from Helena during the second week of April, as the last vestiges of winter snow melted from the mountain peaks, the sisters, Eleanor, aged 35, Beatrice, aged 32, and Ophelia, aged 28, carried only a few well-worn trunks and a small strongbox containing what they claimed were letters of introduction from Helena merchants. These letters recommended Redemption Gulch as a promising location for establishing a refined ladies' social club and boarding house for independent working women. Eleanor, the eldest and undeniable leader of the trio, possessed striking raven hair, often styled in an elaborate updo that bespoke an air of sophistication rare on the frontier. Her piercing blue eyes seemed to penetrate everyone she met, assessing them with an unnerving intensity. Standing nearly 5 feet 10 inches tall, exceptionally statuesque for women of that era, she commanded attention whenever she entered a room. Those who encountered her described a woman of formidable intellect who spoke with the clipped, precise accent of someone educated in the eastern cities, though she remained deliberately vague about their origins when questioned. Her hands, which she kept meticulously gloved even in the dusty environment, showed no signs of manual labor, hinting at a privileged upbringing that made their presence in a rough mining town all the more enigmatic. Beatrice, the second eldest, served as the group's meticulous financial administrator and record keeper. She had a severe countenance with tightly pulled-back auburn hair and sharp brown eyes that missed no detail of any transaction or conversation. While initially appearing more reserved than her dominant older sister, careful observers noted that Beatrice's quiet demeanor masked a cold, calculating intelligence that made her equally formidable in business dealings. She carried herself with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to managing complex financial arrangements and maintaining exhaustive records. Ophelia, the youngest, was the most conventionally beautiful of the three, with cascades of golden blonde hair and soft green eyes that initially charmed the town's male population. Her beauty and apparent innocence made her invaluable for maintaining the establishment's respectable façade and for managing the more delicate aspects of their criminal enterprise. Despite her youthful appearance, she possessed a chillingly hard determination that became evident to anyone who dared to cross her or threaten the sisters' operations. The sisters wasted no time. They quickly rented a massive 4-story brick building at the very end of Main Street. This structure had previously been a failed hotel, its sturdy construction and deep stone foundation extending far below ground level. The building offered over 7,000 square feet of space across its 4 floors, plus an extensive basement area that the original builder had excavated for a grand wine cellar. The Blackwells paid a full 2 years' rent in advance, an unheard-of practice that greatly impressed their landlord, the local banker Thaddeus Thorne, who noted in his ledger that few tenants possessed such financial acumen or faith in their ventures. Within 3 months, they had transformed the space into what they grandly called the Scarlet Garter, ostensibly a refined social club, restaurant, and boarding house catering to the town's small but growing population of women. The transformation was a monumental undertaking, requiring considerable expense and effort. They imported rich velvet curtains from San Francisco, purchased 2 grand pianos from defunct hotels in Denver, acquired a substantial collection of leather-bound books for a ladies' library, and even installed a rudimentary gas lighting system throughout the building, a luxury few establishments in Redemption Gulch could afford. The first floor was designated as a sophisticated restaurant and social area for respectable female guests. This included the wives of successful mine owners like Mrs. Eleanor Harding, the town schoolmistress Miss Adeline Finch, and the few laundresses and shopkeepers' wives. The establishment quickly gained a reputation for its impeccable cleanliness, excellent food, reasonable prices, and refined conversation, a stark contrast to the rough and tumble accommodations available elsewhere in Redemption Gulch. However, observant residents soon noticed that the Scarlet Garter served multiple, less advertised purposes that would become central to understanding the sisters' crimes. The building's 2nd and 3rd floors, accessible through a separate, discreet entrance on a side alley, operated as Redemption Gulch's most exclusive brothel. Unlike the crude, often unkempt establishments that lined Main Street, the Scarlet Garter's upstairs operation, maintained an atmosphere of unparalleled discretion and luxury, attracting the town's wealthiest and most influential clientele. These floors featured 20 elegantly appointed rooms, each furnished with imported rosewood furniture, thick Persian rugs, silk wallpaper, crystal chandeliers, and amenities like private wash basins, ornate mirrors, and even small, curated libraries. The sisters had somehow acquired genuine oil paintings, classical statuettes, and an astonishing collection of fine wines and spirits, creating an ambience more akin to a high society parlor in New York than a frontier brothel. The fourth floor, which the sisters claimed was reserved for their private living quarters, actually served as temporary housing for women who had responded to their employment advertisements but had not yet been assigned permanent roles within the establishment. This floor would later prove central to understanding how the sisters managed to control and eventually eliminate their victims without arousing immediate suspicion from other residents or guests. The first documented disappearance occurred in late July 1887, just 4 months after the Blackwell sisters' arrival in Redemption Gulch. Isabella Bella Ruiz, a 21-year-old woman from a struggling Mexican family in Santa Fe, had come to work at the Scarlet Garter after responding to an advertisement seeking young women of good character for domestic service in a respectable establishment offering steady wages, comfortable accommodations, and opportunities for advancement. Bella's journey to Redemption Gulch had been driven by desperate family circumstances, a recurring theme among the sisters' preferred victims. Her father, a silver prospector, had recently died in a mining accident, leaving her widowed mother and 4 younger siblings with no means of support. The advertisement that attracted Bella had appeared in the Santa Fe Daily Chronicle on June 5, 1887, strategically placed among notices for various employment opportunities. The carefully worded text, crafted by Ophelia Blackwell, who excelled at creating appealing recruitment materials, promised steady employment for industrious young ladies of good character. Domestic service in reputable social club in prosperous mining community. Room, board, and competitive wages provided. Excellent opportunity for reliable workers seeking stable employment and personal advancement. References required. Apply in writing to Miss O. Blackwell, Redemption Gulch, Montana Territory. Bella's letter of application, later found among the sisters' possessions during the investigation, revealed both her desperation and her genuine qualifications for domestic work. Written in careful Spanish with an English translation provided by a local priest who assisted immigrant families, the letter described her experience managing her family's household, her ability to cook, clean, and perform various domestic tasks, and her eagerness to work hard to send money home to support her grieving mother and younger siblings. Ophelia's response, dated June 20, 1887, exemplified the careful manipulation the sisters used to attract and control their victims. The letter expressed satisfaction with Bella's qualifications and invited her to begin employment immediately, explaining that a comfortable room had been prepared for her on the 4th floor and that she could expect to earn $5 per week plus room and board, wages that seemed extraordinarily generous compared to the limited opportunities available to young Mexican women in Santa Fe, where domestic workers typically earned less than $2.50 per week with far less comfortable accommodations. The letter also included detailed instructions for reaching Redemption Gulch, assured Bella that she would be met at Patrick O'Malley's Mercantile upon her arrival, and emphasized the respectability of the establishment and the safety she could expect as an employee of such a well-regarded business. Most importantly, the letter subtly requested detailed information about Bella's family situation, including their financial circumstances, her mother's ability to work, the health of family members, and whether anyone in Santa Fe would be expecting regular communication from her. Bella's letters home during her first month at the Scarlet Garter revealed both her initial satisfaction with her new position and subtle signs of the manipulation that would eventually seal her fate. Her first letter, dated July 10, 1887, expressed gratitude for the clean, comfortable room she had been given on the 4th floor and praised the kindness of the 3 Blackwell sisters, whom she described as refined ladies who treat their employees with consideration and respect rarely shown to Mexican girls in other establishments. She mentioned that her duties included cleaning, assisting in the kitchen, and serving meals to the social club's female guests, work that seemed appropriate and not overly demanding compared to the harsh labor she had expected. However, her subsequent letters contained hints of confusion and unease that would later prove significant to investigators attempting to reconstruct the sisters' methods. Bella wrote that Ophelia had asked extensive questions about her family's circumstances, including their financial situation, her mother's health, and whether anyone in Santa Fe would be expecting regular communication from her. While Ophelia claimed this information was necessary for employment records and to ensure Bella's welfare, the questioning seemed unusually thorough and personal for a domestic service position. More troubling, Bella's third letter, dated August 1, 1887, described increasing restrictions on her movements and communication that seemed increasingly unusual for an employee in good standing. She explained that Eleanor had asked her to limit her correspondence with family to once every 2 weeks, claiming that frequent letter writing interfered with her work duties and created unnecessary postal expenses. She also mentioned that she had been moved from her original comfortable room on the 4th floor to a smaller, windowless room in the basement, supposedly to make space for a new guest, though Bella had seen no evidence of additional boarders requiring accommodation. Most ominously, Bella's final letter, dated August 15, 1887, mentioned strange sounds during nighttime hours that seemed to come from deeper parts of the basement, sounds that Beatrice dismissed as rats or settling timber, when Bella inquired about them. She also wrote about meeting 2 other young women who were supposedly fellow employees, but whom she was instructed not to speak with directly, as they were being trained for specialized duties that required complete concentration and isolation from distractions. Bella's letters stopped abruptly after August 15th, a silence that initially caused little concern for her family, who assumed she was simply busy with her new responsibilities and following the sisters' instructions about limiting correspondence. The sisters had established a pattern of gradually isolating their victims from family contacts before implementing their final plans, using seemingly reasonable explanations to justify reduced communication while gathering the information they would later need to fabricate convincing explanations for sudden departures. When Bella's worried mother, Elena Ruiz, made the difficult and expensive journey to Redemption Gulch in late September, traveling by wagon over rough mountain roads that required 4 days of uncomfortable travel and consumed most of her limited savings, she found the 3 Blackwell sisters sympathetic but unhelpful. Eleanor, speaking through Patrick O'Malley, who served as translator, explained that Bella had left suddenly during the previous week, claiming she had received word of an extraordinary opportunity in San Francisco, where a wealthy family had offered her a position as a personal maid with wages of $10 per week, an amount that seemed almost impossibly generous. She produced a hastily written note allegedly in Bella's handwriting, thanking the sisters for their kindness, but explaining her need to depart immediately to take advantage of this unexpected opportunity. The note, written in Spanish with several English phrases interspersed, seemed to match Bella's writing style at first glance, though Elena noticed subtle differences that made her uncomfortable. The paper appeared to have been aged deliberately with coffee stains and exposure to heat, and the ink seemed different from that used in Bella's previous letters home. When Elena pressed for more details about her daughter's departure, the sisters' story contained numerous inconsistencies that became more apparent as she continued her questioning. They claimed Bella had left before dawn to avoid the desert heat, yet also insisted she had packed all her belongings and received her final wages, which would have required considerable time and noise that should have awakened other residents in the building's close quarters. Ophelia claimed to have personally said goodbye to Bella and wished her well in her new position, but couldn't provide specific details about the family that had supposedly hired her or the circumstances of their offer. The second disappearance followed a disturbingly similar pattern that would later be recognized as evidence of the sisters' systematic approach to selecting and eliminating their victims. In November 1887, Lena Schmidt, a 25-year-old German immigrant who had been working as a laundress in Helena, arrived at the Scarlet Garter seeking employment after responding to another carefully crafted advertisement that had appeared in German-language newspapers throughout Montana and Idaho. Lena's background exemplified the vulnerable circumstances that made women ideal targets for the sisters' operation. She had arrived in America 2 years earlier as part of a large group of German immigrants seeking opportunities in the American West, but her journey had been marked by tragedy and isolation that left her without the family connections that might have protected her from predators. Her parents and younger sister had died during the arduous overland journey to Montana, victims of dysentery that swept through their wagon train, leaving Lena alone in a strange country where she spoke limited English and knew no one. Her exceptional skill with laundry and mending had enabled her to find work in Helena, where she specialized in cleaning and repairing the elaborate clothing favored by the wives of successful miners and businessmen. However, the economic downturn that began in late 1887 had reduced demand for luxury services, and Lena found herself competing with several other laundresses for an increasingly limited number of customers. The advertisement for domestic work at the Scarlet Garter appeared at a time when Lena was facing eviction from her small room above a dry goods store and desperately needed steady employment to avoid complete destitution. The system unveiled throughout 1888 and 1889, a disturbing pattern emerged that would later horrify investigators who finally pieced together the sisters' methodology. Young women continued to arrive at the Scarlet Garter in increasing numbers, drawn by advertisements promising respectable employment and fair wages that appeared in newspapers throughout Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and other western territories where economic hardship created pools of vulnerable women seeking opportunities for stable employment and financial security. The three Blackwell sisters had developed an exceptionally sophisticated recruitment system that exploited the desperate circumstances of women on the American frontier, while minimizing the risk of detection through careful victim selection and systematic elimination of potential witnesses. Each sister specialized in different aspects of the operation. Eleanor handled overall strategy and the corruption of local officials. Beatrice managed financial records and the disposal of stolen property. And Ophelia controlled recruitment and correspondence with potential victims, as well as the more physical aspects of imprisonment and murder. Their advertisements appeared in newspapers throughout the Western territories, always promising opportunities for industrious young ladies of good character, in language carefully crafted to appeal to women seeking respectable employment, while remaining vague enough to avoid specific commitments that might create legal obligations or attract unwanted attention from authorities. The sisters maintained separate post office boxes in Helena, Boise, Cheyenne, and other cities to create the impression of a larger, more established organization with connections throughout the region. Ophelia's correspondence with potential recruits demonstrated the psychological sophistication that made their operation so devastatingly effective. Her letters emphasized the respectability of their establishment, the safety and comfort of their accommodations, the opportunity for reliable women to advance within their organization, and the sisters' understanding of the unique challenges faced by women trying to make their way in the difficult environment of the American frontier. She had developed different recruitment approaches for different types of victims: sympathetic appeals to family obligation for women supporting relatives, promises of education and refinement for those seeking social advancement, and offers of protection and security for those fleeing difficult circumstances. More sinisterly, Ophelia's initial correspondence requested detailed information about each applicant's family situation, financial circumstances, local connections, language skills, and educational background. Information that would later prove crucial in determining who could disappear without triggering unwanted attention from family members or law enforcement. Women with large families, steady employment histories, strong community ties, or connections to influential people rarely received responses to their inquiries, while those whose background suggested isolation, desperation, or vulnerability were eagerly invited to begin employment immediately. The sisters' method of operation became increasingly refined over time as they learned from each successful crime and identified ways to reduce risk while maximizing profit from their expanding criminal enterprise. New arrivals were initially treated with apparent kindness and consideration, given comfortable accommodations in rooms on the building's fourth floor, and assigned light duties around the social club that seemed appropriate for domestic servants. This period of apparent contentment served multiple purposes. It allowed the sisters to evaluate each woman's potential value both as a temporary employee and as an ultimate victim, while also establishing a pattern of happiness and satisfaction that could be referenced in fabricated farewell letters. During this evaluation period, which typically lasted between 3 and 10 weeks, depending on various factors including the victim's family connections and the sisters' current capacity for managing multiple simultaneous operations, the sisters gathered extensive information about each woman's background, family relationships, writing style, personal habits, fears, dreams, and financial resources. They encouraged their new employees to share stories about their past, their hopes for the future, and their concerns about their current circumstances, presenting themselves as sympathetic listeners who understood the challenges faced by young women trying to make their way in the difficult environment of the American frontier. This information would later be used to craft believable explanations for sudden departures and to forge convincing farewell messages that would satisfy family members' concerns without triggering investigations. The sisters maintained detailed psychological profiles of each victim in Beatrice's carefully organized records, documenting handwriting samples, vocabulary preferences, personal concerns, family relationships, and other details that enabled them to create authentic-seeming communications long after their victims had been murdered. The most chilling aspect of the sisters' operation was their patience and systematic approach to each phase of their crimes. They rarely acted immediately upon a woman's arrival, instead waiting weeks or even months before implementing their final plans. This delay served several crucial purposes. It allowed any initial family concerns to subside, as regular letters established a pattern of communication and apparent contentment. It created the impression of established employment that made sudden departures seem more plausible. It gave the sisters time to fully understand each victim's personality and circumstances, and it enabled them to coordinate multiple simultaneous operations without overwhelming their capacity to maintain control and avoid detection. By 1890, the Scarlet Garter had become Redemption Gulch's most respected women's establishment, with a reputation for providing safe, comfortable accommodations and employment opportunities for women from throughout the Western Territories. Local residents had grown accustomed to the steady stream of young women who arrived seeking work and the equally steady departure of employees who supposedly left for better opportunities elsewhere. The constant westward migration of the era made such explanations entirely believable, as young women frequently moved between towns and territories in search of better circumstances or following family members who had relocated for work or health reasons. Sheriff Josiah Vance, when occasionally pressed about missing persons reports from concerned family members, showed remarkable disinterest in investigating the disappearances that seemed to cluster around the Scarlet Garter. Years later, investigators would discover that Vance had been a frequent customer of the Scarlet Garter's upstairs establishment and had received regular gifts from the Blackwell sisters, including cash payments that far exceeded his modest salary, expensive whiskey and cigars that he could never have afforded on his official income, and other considerations that ensured his cooperation in dismissing concerns about missing women. Vance's willingness to dismiss concerns about missing women as the natural result of frontier mobility proved crucial to the sisters' continued operations. When family members like Elena Ruiz attempted to file formal complaints or request investigations, Vance would explain that young women frequently left mining towns for better opportunities elsewhere, particularly immigrants who often moved between communities following seasonal work or family obligations. His official reports, when he bothered to file them at all, invariably concluded that missing women had departed voluntarily for personal reasons and that no criminal activity was suspected. The sisters had also cultivated relationships with other key figures in Redemption Gulch's power structure, ensuring that potential threats to their operation would be neutralized before they could develop into serious problems. Patrick O'Malley, the mercantile owner who controlled much of the town's commercial activity and informal communication networks, received regular orders for expensive imported goods that the sisters purchased for the Scarlet Garter's operations. These transactions, which generated substantial profits for O'Malley's business, created a financial incentive for him to support the sisters' reputation as successful businesswomen rather than investigate inconsistencies in their stories about departing employees. Dr. Alastair Thorne, Redemption Gulch's only physician, had developed a particularly troubling relationship with the three Blackwell sisters that would later draw intense scrutiny from investigators. Dr. Thorne, a middle-aged man whose medical license had been revoked in Missouri under mysterious circumstances involving the suspicious deaths of several female patients, had arrived in Redemption Gulch shortly after the sisters and quickly became one of their most trusted associates. His past professional troubles, which included allegations of performing illegal abortions, providing narcotics to individuals without legitimate medical need, and conducting unauthorized medical experiments on vulnerable patients, made him vulnerable to blackmail and eager to maintain his position as the town's only medical authority. A systematic killing enterprise by 1891, the Blackwell sisters had refined their operation into what can only be described as a systematic killing enterprise that operated with the efficiency of a legitimate business while generating enormous profits through the systematic murder of vulnerable women. Their success stemmed from their ability to maintain multiple distinct reputations within Redemption Gulch's community. The sisters continued to be regarded as respectable businesswomen and valuable community members, while their careful management of information and systematic corruption of local officials ensured that troubling questions about their activities were consistently dismissed or suppressed. The sisters had also developed an extensive network of accomplices and business partners, though most remained unaware of the full extent of their crimes. Jedediah Jed Miller, a former convict who worked as a handyman and general laborer, performed various tasks around the Scarlet Garter that required unusual discretion and physical strength. Jed, a massive man with a violent past who had served time in territorial prison for assault and robbery, asked few questions about the odd jobs the sisters assigned him, which included digging what they claimed were new privies, storage cellars, and drainage systems, always during nighttime hours when other residents were unlikely to observe his activities. Samuel Slim Garrett, a wagon driver who transported goods between Redemption Gulch and larger cities throughout the region, had developed a lucrative side business disposing of items that the sisters claimed were surplus property or belongings left behind by former employees. Garrett's regular routes enabled him to sell these items in distant markets where their origins would not be questioned, and his discretion was ensured through generous payments that supplemented his legitimate income. He never questioned why the sisters always had such large quantities of women's clothing, jewelry, and personal items to dispose of, or why they insisted on conducting these transactions in secrecy. The sisters' method of selecting victims had become increasingly calculated and sophisticated by this period. They focused on women who met specific criteria designed to minimize the risk of discovery, while maximizing the potential profit from each crime. Those with minimal family connections who could disappear without immediate notice, limited financial resources that made extensive searches unlikely, poor English skills or education that might make them more trusting of authority figures, backgrounds that made them unlikely to be missed quickly by law enforcement agencies, and personal circumstances that would make sudden departures seem plausible to anyone who inquired about their whereabouts. Mexican, Chinese, and Native American immigrant women proved particularly vulnerable targets, as the racial prejudices of the era meant their disappearances generated little concern from local authorities, who viewed such women as transient and disposable. The sisters also targeted women fleeing abusive relationships, those with criminal backgrounds who might be reluctant to contact law enforcement, and individuals whose families lived in distant locations where communication was difficult and expensive. Letters from family members seeking information about missing women began to arrive more frequently at the Scarlet Garter as the sisters' operation expanded, but they had developed a comprehensive response system that consistently deflected suspicion while maintaining their reputation for helpfulness and concern. The sisters maintained a collection of sample handwriting from former employees, allowing them to forge believable farewell notes when necessary, and had created detailed backstories for the fictional opportunities and relationships that supposedly attracted their victims to leave Redemption Gulch. Beatrice's record-keeping had evolved into a sophisticated accounting system that treated human lives as business assets while tracking every aspect of their criminal enterprise. Her ledgers documented each victim's arrival date, personal information gathered during the evaluation period, estimated value of their possessions, the method and date of their murder, and the profits generated from selling their belongings. The records also included detailed notes about families' responses to missing person reports, enabling the sisters to monitor the aftermath of each disappearance and take additional action if their explanations failed to satisfy concerned relatives. The physical evidence of their crimes accumulated in the building's extensively modified basement, which the sisters had gradually expanded through Jed Miller's nighttime excavations and construction projects. What had begun as a simple wine cellar had evolved into a complex network of underground chambers that extended far beyond the building's original foundation, reaching under the adjacent alley and connecting to natural subterranean fissures in the area's rocky substrate. The sisters claimed these expansions were necessary for storing supplies and accommodating the boarding house's growing business, but the subterranean layout suggested far more sinister purposes. The basement had been subdivided into multiple specialized areas that served different functions in the sisters' criminal operation. The main area contained storage rooms for victims' belongings, which were sorted and cataloged like merchandise in a warehouse, with valuable items separated for sale and personal mementos kept as trophies. Adjacent chambers had been equipped with heavy chains and restraints, rudimentary soundproofing materials, and drainage systems that facilitated the imprisonment and murder of victims without alerting other residents to the activities taking place below ground. The beginning of the end during this period, the sisters also began to diversify their criminal activities beyond simple murder for profit. They had developed elaborate blackmail schemes targeting their brothel's prominent clients, using Eleanor's sharp intellect and the sisters' collective attention to detail to gather compromising information about territorial officials, owners, railroad executives, and other influential men who could not afford public scandal. Ophelia's beauty and apparent innocence made her particularly effective at extracting secrets from clients who underestimated her intelligence and ambition. This blackmail operation provided the sisters with both additional income and crucial protection from law enforcement scrutiny. Sheriff Vance's dismissive attitude toward missing persons reports became more understandable when investigators later discovered that the sisters possessed detailed records of his gambling debts, illicit affairs with several local women, and his regular visits to their establishment's upstairs rooms. Similar leverage existed over other officials who might otherwise have been inclined to investigate the growing number of disappearances associated with the Scarlet Garter. The sisters had also established connections with criminal networks in other territories, enabling them to expand their operations beyond Redemption Gulch while maintaining the appearance of operating a simple social club and brothel. They maintained correspondence with individuals in San Francisco, Denver, Salt Lake City, and other western cities who assisted in disposing of stolen property, providing false documents for various fraudulent schemes, and recruiting additional victims who could be transported to Redemption Gulch under false pretenses. The sisters' carefully constructed operation began to show signs of strain in early 1893 when they made a critical error that would eventually lead to their downfall. The mistake came in the form of Clara Jensen, a spirited 27-year-old Danish immigrant who had arrived in Redemption Gulch seeking employment after losing her position as a schoolteacher in a small Idaho town when its silver mine closed down. Clara possessed qualities that set her apart from the sisters' typical victims and should have disqualified her from consideration under their usual selection criteria. She was literate, assertive, well-educated, and maintained regular correspondence with a large extended family in Omaha who would immediately notice if her letters stopped arriving. Her education, though not formal, was extensive enough to enable her to teach children of various ages, and her confidence in dealing with authority figures made her unlikely to accept restrictions or explanations that might seem suspicious to someone with less experience navigating complex social situations. More importantly, Clara came from a stable background with strong family connections that should have made her disappearance immediately noticeable to people who possessed the resources and motivation to demand thorough investigations. Her father, a successful carpenter in Omaha, earned sufficient income to support his family while maintaining regular communication with relatives throughout the American West. Her mother came from a family with connections to Nebraska's political establishment, relationships that could potentially bring pressure on territorial and federal law enforcement agencies if Clara were to vanish under suspicious circumstances. Clara had responded to one of the sisters' advertisements that appeared in the Idaho Statesman on February 1, 1893, during a period when her employment prospects seemed particularly bleak due to the economic difficulties that affected many small towns throughout the West. The advertisement, composed by Ophelia using her most sophisticated recruitment language, promised exceptional opportunities for educated young women capable of domestic management, social instruction, and administrative assistance in a refined frontier establishment serving discerning clientele. Her letter of application, later recovered during the investigation, revealed both her qualifications and her family situation in detail that should have warned the sisters away from selecting her as a potential victim. Clara described her experience as a schoolteacher, her ability to teach children reading, writing, arithmetic, and social graces, her familiarity with household management responsibilities that enabled her to supervise other domestic workers, and her fluency in both English and Danish. More significantly, she mentioned her large family in Omaha, her regular correspondence with relatives throughout the country, and her plans to eventually return east when she had saved sufficient money to establish herself in a business or marry respectably. However, the sisters' criminal enterprise had become so successful and profitable that they apparently grew overconfident in their ability to eliminate any woman who might threaten their operation, regardless of her background or connections. The The steady stream of victims over nearly 8 years had created a sense of invulnerability that led them to take risks they might have avoided during their earlier, more cautious period of operation. Ophelia's response to Clara's application, dated February 20, 1893, eagerly invited her to begin employment immediately at wages of $7 per week, plus room and board, compensation that was generous enough to overcome Clara's initial hesitation about traveling to such a remote location to work for employers she had never met. The letter emphasized the sisters' appreciation for educated women who could serve as role models for other employees and assist with the establishment's reputation for respectability and refinement. Clara's suspicions mount within days of Clara's arrival at the Scarlet Garter in early March 1893. She began to notice disturbing patterns that previous victims had either missed or been unable to act upon due to their more vulnerable circumstances. Her education and confidence enabled her to observe details that less sophisticated women might have dismissed, and her family connections gave her both the motivation and ability to document her concerns in ways that could eventually reach law enforcement authorities. The building's layout included several rooms and areas that appeared to be permanently locked or restricted, despite the sisters' claims that they were used for storing supplies, seasonal equipment, or accommodating special guests who required privacy. When Clara offered to help with cleaning or organizing these storage areas, demonstrating the kind of initiative that had made her valuable as a teacher, all three sisters became evasive and insisted that the rooms contained personal belongings or sensitive business materials that required no attention from employees. Strange sounds emanated from the basement during nighttime hours, not the typical creaking and settling noises of an old brick building, but deliberate movements, muffled voices, and what sounded like construction work or excavation activities. The sounds typically began well after midnight and continued until dawn, suggesting activities that the sisters preferred to conduct when other residents were unlikely to be awake and observant. When Clara mentioned these disturbances during casual conversation, Ophelia became visibly nervous and claimed the sounds were caused by rats, desert animals, or the building's heating system, explanations that seemed implausible to someone with Clara's intelligence and experience. Most troubling, Clara discovered personal belongings hidden in various locations throughout the building that clearly belonged to other women who had supposedly left town for better opportunities elsewhere. These items were not simply forgotten possessions that might be expected when someone departed in haste, but valuable personal effects and sentimental items that no woman would voluntarily abandon. Jewelry with obvious family significance, religious items like crucifixes and prayer books with personal inscriptions, professional tools like sewing equipment and medical instruments, photographs of family members, and letters from loved ones that revealed intimate family relationships and circumstances. Clara's letter to her sister Ingrid, dated April 1, 1893, and later recovered by investigators, described her growing concerns with the detailed observations that would prove crucial in eventually exposing the sisters' crimes. The three Blackwell sisters maintain an impressive facade of respectability and business success, but something feels terribly wrong about this place. I have found women's clothing and personal items hidden in closets and storage areas throughout the building, far more than could be explained by the occasional departures I have witnessed since my arrival. The sisters claim these belongings were left behind by former employees who departed suddenly for various opportunities, but the quantity and nature of these items suggest a much more troubling explanation. Clara continued, "Most disturbing is a collection of jewelry, family photographs, and personal mementos that no woman would willingly leave behind, including a silver locket containing photographs of children, sewing scissors with carved mother-of-pearl handles that represent a substantial investment for any seamstress, a German prayer book with a woman's name inscribed inside the cover, and letters from family members expressing concern about not hearing from their daughters or sisters. I have counted belongings from at least 30 different women. Yet, I have been told of only 5 departures during my time here." More damaging to the sisters' operation, Clara possessed the education and confidence to ask direct questions about inconsistencies she observed, questions that previous victims had either been too intimidated or too isolated to pursue effectively. When Eleanor claimed that a former employee named Sarah O'Connell had left suddenly for Denver to marry a wealthy merchant she had met through correspondence, Clara pointed out that Sarah's best dress remained hanging in her former room, her life savings were still hidden beneath her mattress, and her most treasured possession, a gold rosary that had belonged to her deceased mother, was still hanging on a nail beside her bed. Sarah had confided to Clara about these savings during their brief acquaintance, explaining that she planned to use the money to bring her younger sister west from Ireland once she had established herself in stable employment. She had also spoken about the gold rosary with deep emotion, describing how her mother had given it to her on her deathbed and made Sarah promise never to part with it. The idea that Sarah would abandon both her carefully hoarded savings and her most precious family heirloom seemed impossible to anyone who had known her personally. Eleanor's explanation that Sarah had been so excited about her sudden romantic opportunity that she forgot her most valuable possessions in her haste to begin her new life struck Clara as not merely implausible, but deliberately deceptive. The explanation required believing that a careful, methodical woman like Sarah would abandon months of savings and her most treasured family heirloom because of romantic excitement, a scenario that contradicted everything Clara had observed about Sarah's personality and priorities. Clara's suspicions intensified when she discovered Dr. Thorne's nighttime visits to the building were far more frequent than would be necessary for treating occasional ailments among the residents or providing routine medical care for the establishment's various operations. Through careful observation from her fourth-floor room, which provided a clear view of the building's side entrance and the surrounding alley, Clara documented a pattern of visits that occurred approximately twice per week, always between midnight and dawn, and always involving the doctor carrying his medical bag and additional equipment directly to the basement entrance rather than to patient rooms on the upper floors. When she questioned Beatrice about these visits, citing genuine concern for any fellow employees who might be seriously ill, and offering to help with nursing care based on her experience caring for sick children during her teaching work, the sister became visibly agitated and provided contradictory explanations that revealed their growing difficulty in maintaining their deceptive cover stories. First, Beatrice claimed the doctor was treating a woman suffering from consumption who required isolation in the basement to prevent the disease from spreading to other residents. When Clara offered to help care for the patient, explaining that she had experienced nursing sick children and was not afraid of contagious diseases, Beatrice quickly changed her story, claiming the woman had recovered completely and departed for a sanitarium in Colorado where she could receive specialized treatment. Later that same week, when Clara inquired about the apparent absence of any basement patient rooms during her daytime exploration of the building's lower level, Beatrice offered yet another explanation. Dr. Thorne was treating women from the town's red light district who required discreet medical attention for delicate conditions that would be compromised by publicity or association with respectable establishments. This explanation seemed more plausible given the realities of frontier medicine and the social attitudes of the era, but Clara noticed that she never observed any women entering or leaving the building during the doctor's nighttime visits. The crisis point arrived when Clara's curiosity and growing suspicions led her to attempt a more thorough exploration of the building's basement area during the early morning hours of April 10, 1893. She had waited until the building had grown quiet, and she was confident that the sisters had retired to their private quarters before attempting to access the lower level through a door she had seen Dr. Thorne use during his visits. The door, located behind the main staircase and partially concealed by stored furniture and supplies, appeared to lead to a different section of the basement than the area she had previously explored during her regular duties. What she discovered there would have sealed her fate immediately had she not possessed the presence of mind to retreat quickly and begin planning her escape from Redemption Gulch before the sisters realized the extent of her knowledge. Behind the concealed door lay a narrow staircase leading to a lower level that had been extensively excavated beyond the building's original foundation. The basement area had been subdivided into multiple small chambers, each equipped with heavy chains attached to the walls, iron rings embedded in the stone floor, and rudimentary drainage systems that suggested purposes far more sinister than simple storage or accommodation. The stench of death and decay permeated the underground space despite obvious attempts to mask the odors with lime, lye, and other chemicals that had been applied in quantities suggesting systematic efforts to conceal evidence over extended periods. The air was thick and oppressive, making breathing difficult and creating an atmosphere of horror that Clara would later describe as unlike anything she had ever experienced. In the largest chamber, Clara discovered physical evidence that left no doubt about the sisters' true activities. A vast collection of women's clothing, shoes, jewelry, and personal belongings that had been sorted and organized as if they were valuable merchandise awaiting sale. The items represented dozens of different women, far more than could be explained by the normal turnover of employees in even the busiest legitimate boarding house operation. Most horrifying were the personal mementos and family photographs that no woman would voluntarily abandon, evidence of lives cut short for the sake of profit and greed. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Redemption Gulch intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next in this tale of systematic murder on the American frontier. The incriminating ledgers. Clara also discovered detailed accounting ledgers that revealed the systematic nature of the sisters' operation and the shocking scope of their crimes over nearly 8 years of continuous activity. Written in Beatrice's careful handwriting, these records documented each victim's arrival date, personal information gathered during the evaluation period, estimated value of their possessions, and the date of their murder. The ledgers treated human lives as business transactions, recording profits from the sale of victims' belongings, expenses associated with disposing of bodies, and ongoing costs for maintaining their operation, including bribes to local officials and payments to accomplices throughout the region. Most chilling were the detailed notes about families' responses to missing persons reports, indicating that the sisters carefully monitored the aftermath of each disappearance to assess whether their explanations had been accepted or whether additional action might be necessary to prevent investigations. The records showed that they had successfully convinced most families that their daughters or sisters had departed voluntarily for better opportunities, but they also noted cases where persistent relatives had required additional attention, including bribes to local officials, more elaborate deceptions to maintain their cover stories, or, in several cases, threats against family members who became too persistent. In their inquiries, Clara's discovery included evidence of the sisters' expanding criminal network, which extended far beyond Redemption Gulch and involved individuals in multiple states and territories. The ledgers contained correspondence with individuals in San Francisco, Denver, Salt Lake City, Portland, and other western cities who assisted in disposing of stolen property, providing false documents for various fraudulent schemes, or creating believable cover stories for the sisters' activities. This network enabled them to operate with a level of sophistication that would have been impossible for 3 isolated women in a remote mining town. The records also revealed that the sisters had been gradually expanding their operation, with plans to establish similar ventures in other mining towns throughout the region. They had been using their accumulated wealth to purchase property and establish business connections in communities where they could replicate their Redemption Gulch success, while maintaining their current operation as a source of ongoing income and a training ground for refining their methods. Clara's letter to her sister Ingrid, dated April 12, 1893, and mailed from Helena rather than Redemption Gulch, provided the first detailed account of what she had witnessed in the basement chambers. I have discovered something so horrible that I dare not commit all the details to paper, lest this letter be intercepted before reaching you safely. The basement of this establishment contains chambers that serve no legitimate purpose, and I have seen evidence that the 3 sisters' explanations for departing employees are elaborate deceptions designed to conceal systematic murder on a scale that defies comprehension. Clara continued, "The scope of their crimes extends far beyond what anyone could imagine, involving dozens of women over several years and a network of accomplices that reaches across multiple territories. I have seen detailed records that treat human lives as business transactions, documenting each murder with the same precision that legitimate businesses apply to their commercial activities. I am leaving immediately and will provide full details to territorial authorities upon reaching safety, but I fear that many more women will die if immediate action is not taken to stop these monsters." The investigation and aftermath. Clara Jensen's escape and subsequent testimony to territorial authorities in Helena triggered the investigation that would finally expose the full extent of the Blackwell sisters' crimes. Her detailed account, supported by physical evidence she had managed to smuggle out of the Scarlet Garter hidden in her personal belongings, convinced Samuel Silas Blackwood, a retired Pinkerton agent now working as a territorial investigator, to organize the most comprehensive criminal investigation in Montana Territory's history. Blackwood, a former Union Army captain who had served with distinction during the Civil War before accepting his territorial appointment, possessed both the experience and authority necessary to conduct a thorough investigation, despite the potential resistance from local officials who had been compromised by the sisters' operation. Clara's testimony, recorded in detailed depositions that later became central evidence in the sisters' trial, provided investigators with their first comprehensive understanding of the systematic nature of the murders and the sophisticated criminal organization that had operated undetected for nearly 8 years. She described the basement chambers she had discovered, the accounting ledgers that documented each victim with businesslike precision, the network of accomplices that enabled the sisters to operate across multiple territories, and the methods they used to select vulnerable women who could disappear without triggering immediate investigations. More importantly, Clara's account enabled investigators to understand how the sisters had maintained their operation for so many years without detection, despite repeated warnings from concerned family members and the obviously suspicious pattern of disappearances associated with their establishment. Her observations about the corruption of local officials, the exploitation of social prejudices that made certain women's disappearances less noticeable, and the sophisticated methods used to create believable explanations for sudden departures provided a comprehensive roadmap for understanding how such extensive crimes could occur in supposedly civilized communities. The investigation began in earnest on May 15, 1893, when Blackwood arrived in Redemption Gulch with a team of 15 deputies, 2 territorial judges authorized to issue warrants and conduct preliminary hearings for physicians qualified to conduct forensic examinations of human remains, and a court stenographer to document all proceedings. The size and composition of the investigative team reflected both the seriousness of the allegations and the anticipated resistance from local officials who might attempt to obstruct the investigation to protect their own interests. The 3 sisters attempted to maintain their facade of innocent cooperation when the investigators arrived, but their nervous behavior and obvious attempts to prevent access to certain areas of the building immediately raised suspicions among the experienced lawmen. Eleanor, whose intelligence and composure had been crucial to their operation's success, seemed uncharacteristically flustered when presented with the comprehensive search warrant, asking repeated questions about its scope and attempting to negotiate limitations on the areas that could be examined and the materials that could be seized. Beatrice's reaction was even more telling, as she attempted to hide or destroy business records before the investigators could examine them, claiming that the documents contained sensitive financial information about their legitimate business operations that should be protected from public scrutiny. Her obvious panic when investigators demanded access to all records and correspondence suggested that she understood the incriminating nature of the materials they would discover. Ophelia attempted to maintain her usual charm and apparent innocence, but her nervous chatter and contradictory statements about the building's layout, the number of women currently employed at the establishment, and the purposes of various rooms created immediate suspicion among investigators who had been trained to recognize deceptive behavior. The basement revealed the true horror of the sisters' operation in ways that exceeded even Clara Jensen's detailed descriptions. What the Blackwells had claimed were storage areas and additional rooms for accommodating guests proved to be an extensive complex of chambers designed for imprisonment, torture, and systematic murder. The main basement area had been subdivided into multiple small rooms using stone walls and heavy wooden doors equipped with locks that could only be operated from the outside, creating what amounted to underground prison cells. Each chamber contained evidence of its sinister purpose: heavy chains and shackles attached to the walls and floors, rudimentary drainage systems that had been installed to facilitate the disposal of blood and other bodily fluids, soundproofing materials, including thick carpets and padded walls that would prevent screams from being heard by residents on the upper floors, and ventilation shafts that had been deliberately blocked to create suffocating conditions that would accelerate victims' deaths. The stench of death permeated the underground space despite obvious attempts to mask odors with lime, lye, and other chemicals that had been applied in quantities suggesting systematic efforts to conceal evidence over extended periods. The investigators, despite their military and law enforcement experience with violent crime, found the atmosphere so oppressive that they were forced to work in short shifts and provide medical attention to several team members who became physically ill during the initial examination. In the deepest chambers, which could only be accessed through concealed passages behind false walls, investigators discovered the physical evidence that would seal the sisters' fate: a vast collection of personal belongings taken from their victims, carefully catalogued and stored as if they were valuable merchandise awaiting sale. The items filled multiple rooms and represented the remnants of at least 92 lives cut short by the sisters' systematic greed and cruelty. The collection included jewelry ranging from simple wedding rings to elaborate necklaces that suggested some victims had come from wealthy families, clothing sorted by size and quality for potential resale with careful notes about market values, professional tools like sewing equipment, medical instruments, and teaching materials that indicated the diverse backgrounds of the victims. Religious items including crucifixes, prayer books, Jewish ritual objects, and Islamic prayer beads that demonstrated the broad range of women who had been targeted, and most heartbreakingly, personal mementos like family photographs, letters from loved ones, children's drawings, and keepsakes that represented the emotional connections that had been severed forever. More damning evidence emerged from the sisters' own records, which demonstrated the business-like precision with which they had approached mass murder over nearly 8 years of continuous operation. Beatrice's accounting ledgers, discovered hidden in multiple locations throughout the basement complex, revealed the full scope of their operation and provided investigators with detailed documentation of 92 individual murders. The ledgers documented each victim with the same attention to detail that legitimate businesses applied to their commercial transactions. Entries included each woman's name, age, background information, date of arrival at the Scarlet Garter, estimated value of their possessions, detailed notes about their family connections and potential for being missed if they disappeared, the method and date of their murder, and comprehensive records of profits generated from selling their belongings through the sisters' network of accomplices. The accounting system also revealed the sisters' methods for selecting victims, with detailed notes about each woman's family situation, financial resources, language skills, education level, and likelihood of being missed if they disappeared. The records showed clear preferences for immigrants with limited English skills, women from impoverished backgrounds who lacked resources for extensive searches, individuals whose family connections were distant or complicated by geographic separation, and those whose personal circumstances made sudden departures seem plausible. Most chilling were the detailed notes about the murder methods employed, which had been refined over time to maximize efficiency while minimizing the risk of detection. The records described experiments with different poisons acquired through Dr. Thorne's medical connections, techniques for restraining victims during the killing process to prevent noise or struggle, and methods for disposing of bodies that would prevent identification if remains were ever discovered by accident. The systematic nature of these entries suggested that the sisters viewed murder as a technical problem to be solved through careful research, experimentation, and continuous improvement of their methods. They had developed what amounted to an assembly line approach to killing, with each sister specializing in different aspects of the process to maximize efficiency and minimize the time required to eliminate each victim. The investigation also uncovered evidence of the sisters' extensive network of accomplices, which reached far beyond Redemption Gulch and involved individuals in multiple states and territories. Correspondence found among their possessions revealed connections to fences who specialized in disposing of victims' jewelry and valuable belongings in distant markets, document forgers who provided false papers for various fraudulent schemes, corrupt officials in other towns who facilitated the sisters' recruitment activities by recommending Redemption Gulch as a destination for women seeking employment, and even other criminal organizations that operated similar schemes in different regions. Dr. Alastair Thorne's role in the operation proved even more disturbing than investigators had initially suspected. His medical expertise had been crucial in developing killing methods that would not immediately be recognized as murder if bodies were discovered, and he had performed crude surgical procedures to remove identifying features from victims, making identification difficult if remains were ever uncovered by accident. His personal journals, discovered during a search of his residence, contained detailed notes about the physiological effects of various poisons, mechanical methods of causing death while minimizing obvious signs of violence, and techniques for accelerating decomposition of human remains. The investigation revealed that Jed Miller's nighttime excavations had not been limited to expanding the basement for storage, as the sisters had claimed to local residents. He had dug an extensive network of burial sites in the desolate badlands surrounding Redemption Gulch, locations where the sisters disposed of their victims' remains after extracting maximum profit from their murders. These burial sites, identified through information found in the sisters' records and Thorne's journals, were located in remote areas where the harsh desert conditions would accelerate decomposition and reduce the likelihood of accidental discovery. The scope of the physical evidence overwhelmed the territorial investigation team, requiring additional personnel and resources to properly document and analyze the materials recovered from the Scarlet Garter and its associated burial sites. The investigation ultimately required nearly 5 months to complete, involving dozens of personnel, including law enforcement officers, medical examiners, court officials, and specialists in forensic techniques who worked to build the comprehensive case that would ensure the sisters' conviction and execution. The trial and execution. The trial of Eleanor, Beatrice, and Ophelia Blackwell began on October 1, 1893, in the Territorial Court in Helena, presided over by Judge Theron Albright, a distinguished jurist who had been specifically appointed to handle the case due to its unprecedented complexity and national significance. The proceedings attracted international attention from newspapers throughout the United States and Europe, as the systematic nature of their crimes and the large number of victims made their case one of the most shocking in world criminal history. Reporters from major newspapers in San Francisco, Denver, Chicago, New York, London, and Paris established temporary bureaus in Helena to provide daily coverage of what was being called the Redemption Gulch atrocities, the Blackwell sisters' House of Horrors, and the most systematic murder enterprise in American history. The courtroom, normally adequate for the territorial court's typical caseload of mining disputes and minor criminal matters, proved completely inadequate for the crowds of spectators, reporters, family members of victims, and curiosity seekers who traveled from across the Western Territories and beyond to witness the proceedings. Judge Albright was forced to move the trial to Helena's largest available venue, the newly constructed Territorial Opera House, where temporary seating arrangements accommodated nearly 1,000 observers while maintaining appropriate security and decorum for such serious criminal proceedings. The prosecution team, led by Territorial Attorney General Marcus Thorne with assistance from federal prosecutors specially assigned to the case, faced the unprecedented challenge of presenting evidence of 92 separate murders while maintaining the jury's attention and ensuring that the systematic nature of the crimes was clearly understood. Thorne, a Yale-educated lawyer who had previously prosecuted several high-profile criminal cases in California and had served as a military prosecutor during the Civil War, organized the evidence chronologically to demonstrate the evolution of the sisters' operation from opportunistic crimes to the most sophisticated murder enterprise in American criminal history. The evidence against the sisters proved overwhelming in both quantity and quality, creating a case that legal scholars would later describe as the most comprehensively documented mass murder prosecution of the 19th century. Clara Jensen's testimony provided crucial eyewitness accounts of the sisters' suspicious behavior, the basement chambers that had exposed their crimes, and the systematic methods they used to select and eliminate their victims. Her detailed observations, supported by physical evidence she had smuggled out of the Scarlet Garter, established the foundation for understanding how the sisters had operated with impunity for nearly 8 years. The physical evidence recovered from the basement chambers included items belonging to each of the 92 documented victims, creating a compelling visual display that filled multiple rooms in the Opera House and provided tangible proof of the scope of the sisters' crimes. The accounting ledgers maintained by Beatrice offered unprecedented insight into the business-like approach the sisters had taken to mass murder, with detailed records that enabled prosecutors to establish precise timelines, methods, and profits for each killing. Dr. Alastair Thorne, who had been arrested alongside the sisters and initially faced charges as an accomplice to murder, agreed to testify against them in exchange for a reduced sentence of life imprisonment rather than execution. His testimony provided horrific details about the methods used to murder their victims, the procedures employed to prevent identification of remains, the network of accomplices that had enabled the sisters to operate across multiple territories without detection, and the systematic refinement of their killing techniques over nearly 8 years of continuous operation. Thorne's medical knowledge made his testimony particularly damaging, as he could explain in clinical detail how the sisters had refined their killing methods over time to maximize efficiency while minimizing evidence that could lead to their detection. His personal journals, introduced as evidence, contained detailed notes about experiments with different poisons, observations about the effectiveness of various mechanical methods of causing death, recommendations for disposing of bodies to prevent identification, and even suggestions for expanding their operation to other territories. The testimony of family members provided the emotional impact necessary to ensure that the jury understood the human cost of the sisters' crimes and the devastating impact on communities throughout the American West. Elena Ruiz, whose daughter Bella had been among the first documented victims, provided heart-wrenching testimony about her family's futile search for answers and the false hope created by the sisters' deceptive explanations. Her account of traveling from Santa Fe to Redemption Gulch, only to be dismissed by corrupt local officials, highlighted the systematic corruption that had enabled the sisters' operation to continue undetected for so many years. Ingrid Jensen, Clara's sister, who had received the letters describing her growing suspicions about the Scarlet Garter, provided testimony that helped establish the timeline of events leading to the investigation. Her decision to contact territorial authorities after receiving Clara's final letter from Helena had been crucial in initiating the investigation that exposed the sisters' crimes and prevented additional murders. Dozens of other family members provided similar testimony, creating a powerful cumulative impact that demonstrated the scope of the sisters' crimes and the devastation they had inflicted on families and communities throughout the American West. Many of these witnesses had traveled great distances at considerable personal expense to seek justice for their lost daughters, sisters, wives, and mothers. Their presence served as a powerful reminder of the human cost of the sisters' systematic greed and cruelty. The sisters' defense attorney, Elias Vance, had been appointed by the territorial court due to the complexity of the case and the defendant's lack of financial resources to hire private counsel. Vance, a competent lawyer who had previously handled several capital cases and had served as a military defense attorney during the Civil War, faced the impossible task of defending clients whose guilt was established by overwhelming physical evidence, detailed written records of their crimes, and testimony from dozens of witnesses. Vance attempted to argue that the women had been driven to desperate measures by the harsh conditions of frontier life and their need to protect themselves from dangerous men who might have threatened their safety or livelihood. He suggested that their crimes had begun as acts of self-defense that had gradually escalated due to their increasing desperation, fear of being discovered, and the corrupting influence of easy profits from their initial victims. This argument found little sympathy with the jury, who had heard extensive testimony about the calculated, systematic nature of the murders and the sisters' obvious financial motivations over nearly 8 years of continuous operation. The defense also attempted to argue that the younger sisters had been dominated by Eleanor and had participated in the crimes only under duress, claiming that the eldest sister's superior intelligence and forceful personality had coerced her siblings into becoming unwilling accomplices in increasingly serious crimes. However, the prosecution's evidence showed that all 3 sisters had been active participants in planning and executing the murders, with each sister's handwriting appearing in the accounting records and witness testimony establishing their individual involvement in selecting, manipulating, and killing their victims. During the trial, investigators presented evidence that the sisters had accumulated extraordinary wealth through their crimes, including cash reserves of nearly $60,000, gold coins and jewelry worth tens of thousands of dollars more, and valuable personal items taken from their victims that represented additional assets worth thousands more. This wealth had been carefully hidden in various locations around Redemption Gulch, in bank accounts established under false names in Helena, San Francisco, Denver, and other cities, and in the form of property investments that the sisters had made using their victims' identities and forged documents. The financial evidence demonstrated that the sisters had been planning to eventually abandon their Redemption Gulch operation and establish themselves elsewhere under assumed identities, using their accumulated wealth to purchase respectability in new locations where their criminal past would be unknown. Their long-term planning and systematic approach to accumulating resources showed that they viewed their murder operation as a temporary means to achieve permanent financial security and social status that would enable them to live as wealthy, respectable women for the rest of their lives. The most compelling testimony came from territorial officials who had investigated similar disappearances in other mining towns and communities throughout Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and other Western territories. Their research had revealed a pattern of missing women that corresponded to the sisters' known movements before their arrival in Redemption Gulch, suggesting that their criminal activities may have begun years earlier and involved additional victims whose deaths had never been properly investigated. These officials testified that they had identified at least 50 additional cases of missing women in communities where the sisters had been present during the relevant time periods. Though the evidence was not sufficient to bring formal charges for these earlier crimes, the testimony suggested that the true scope of the sisters' criminal activities may have been even larger than the 92 documented murders, with a total victim count that could have exceeded 140 women over a period of perhaps 10 or 11 years. On December 20th, 1893, after deliberating for less than 3 hours, the jury returned guilty verdicts against all three sisters for multiple counts of first-degree murder. The speed of their deliberation reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence and the jury's unanimous conviction that the defendants deserved the maximum punishment available under territorial law. Territorial Judge Theron Albright sentenced all three women to death by hanging, making them the first multiple female defendants to receive capital punishment in Montana Territory, and creating one of the largest mass executions in American criminal history. The judge's remarks during sentencing reflected both the community's shock and revulsion at the scope of their crimes and the broader implications for American society. Your crimes represent not merely the taking of human life for personal gain, but the most systematic and calculated betrayal of human trust and decency ever documented in American criminal history. Judge Albright continued, "You have taken advantage of the most vulnerable members of our society, young women seeking honest employment and the opportunity to build better lives for themselves and their families. And you have exploited their desperation and hope for purely selfish gain, showing a complete absence of human compassion, decency, or moral restraint. Your actions have not only ended the lives of 92 innocent women, but have also caused immeasurable pain to their families and communities, damaged the reputation of legitimate businesses that provide employment and shelter to women on the frontier, and undermined the basic trust that must exist between human beings in a civilized society." The judge's sentencing remarks also addressed the broader implications of the case for territorial law enforcement and social policy. This case has revealed serious deficiencies in our system of law enforcement, our protection of vulnerable populations, and our oversight of business establishments that serve transient populations. The fact that these crimes could continue for nearly 8 years without detection, despite repeated reports from concerned family members and obvious patterns that should have triggered investigations, demonstrates the need for fundamental reforms in how we investigate missing persons cases, how we ensure the integrity of our local officials, and how we protect those who depend on our institutions for safety and justice. The executions took place on February 5, 1894, before a crowd of nearly 6,000 spectators who had traveled from throughout the United States and several foreign countries to witness the end of the Blackwell sisters' reign of terror. The execution site, a specially constructed gallows in Helena's Courthouse Square, required extensive security arrangements due to the size of the crowd and the intense emotions generated by the case. Contemporary newspaper accounts describe the sisters' final moments in detail that reflects both the public fascination with their crimes and the era's attitudes toward female criminals. All three women maintained their composure until the final moments, though their behavior differed markedly in their approach to their impending death. Eleanor reportedly made a brief statement acknowledging their crimes but claiming they had been driven to desperation by circumstances beyond their control, including the need to survive in a hostile environment that offered few opportunities for respectable women to earn adequate livings. Beatrice remained silent during the final proceedings, though witnesses reported that she appeared to be praying quietly and clutching a small rosary that had been allowed as her final personal possession. Ophelia, the youngest, attempted to maintain her characteristic charm even on the gallows, thanking the crowd for their attention and expressing hope that their story would serve as a warning to other young women about the dangers of frontier life. The simultaneous execution of three women created an unprecedented spectacle that would be remembered as one of the most significant events in Montana Territory's history. The crowd's reaction was described as a mixture of satisfaction, horror, and fascination, with many spectators traveling hundreds of miles to witness what newspapers called the end of America's most systematic murder enterprise. Legacy and lessons learned the aftermath of the case brought sweeping changes to law enforcement practices throughout Montana Territory and the broader American West. The revelation that Sheriff Josiah Vance and several other local officials had been compromised by the sisters' blackmail scheme led to a comprehensive investigation of corruption in frontier law enforcement, resulting in the removal of dozens of officials and the implementation of new oversight procedures designed to prevent similar failures in the future. The territorial government established new protocols for investigating missing persons reports, particularly those involving vulnerable women who might be targets for exploitation. These protocols required local law enforcement agencies to maintain detailed records of missing persons cases, coordinate with territorial authorities when patterns of disappearances were identified, conduct thorough investigations regardless of the victim's social status or ethnicity, and provide regular reports on the status of ongoing investigations to territorial supervisors. The case also led to increased regulation of boarding houses, hotels, and other establishments that provided accommodation to transient populations. New territorial regulations required such businesses to maintain detailed records of their guests and employees, provide regular reports to local authorities about individuals staying at their establishments, submit to periodic inspections to ensure compliance with safety and sanitation standards, and demonstrate legitimate business purposes for any unusual activities or construction projects. The Scarlet Garter building was demolished within days of the sisters' execution, and the site remained vacant for decades afterward. Local residents reported that the location was considered cursed, though more likely the association with such horrific crimes made it impossible to find tenants or purchasers willing to occupy the space. Redemption Gulch itself began its decline during the late 1890s as the gold deposits played out, and by 1905, the town had been largely abandoned as residents moved to more promising locations or returned to more established communities. Today, only scattered foundation stones and hardy desert vegetation mark the location where one of the American West's most systematic killing enterprises operated for nearly 8 years. The site has become a destination for historians, criminologists, and researchers interested in frontier crime, though visitors consistently report an atmosphere of unease and sadness that seems to linger more than a century after the tragic events that occurred there. This chilling mystery shows us that the most terrifying criminals in American history were not supernatural monsters or deranged individuals acting on uncontrollable impulses, but ordinary people who made calculated decisions to exploit the vulnerabilities of others for personal gain. The Blackwell sisters' systematic approach to murder, their ability to maintain respectable facades while committing horrific crimes over nearly a decade, and their exploitation of social prejudices and institutional weaknesses of their era make their case a chilling example of human evil disguised as respectability and community membership. Their story demonstrates how social isolation, economic desperation, corruption, and prejudice can create conditions that enable predators to operate with impunity for extended periods, preying on the most vulnerable members of society, while avoiding detection through manipulation of social expectations and systematic corruption of authority figures. The sisters' success in maintaining their operation for nearly 8 years despite repeated warnings from concerned family members and obvious patterns that should have triggered investigations illustrates the critical importance of protecting vulnerable populations and maintaining vigilant oversight of institutions and individuals who hold positions of trust and authority. The case also reveals how criminal enterprises can exploit the anonymity and social disruption of rapidly changing communities, using the constant movement of people and the weakness of formal institutions to mask systematic predation. The sisters' operation succeeded because Redemption Gulch's boomtown environment created conditions where people frequently arrived and departed without extensive documentation, where law enforcement was weak and often corrupt, and where social prejudices made certain victims' disappearances less likely to generate serious investigations. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed about their operation, or might there be additional victims and accomplices who were never discovered? Could similar crimes occur today, or have modern communication systems and law enforcement techniques made such systematic predation impossible? The sisters' ability to maintain detailed business records while treating human lives as commercial transactions raises disturbing questions about how ordinary people can become capable of extraordinary evil when presented with opportunities for profit and convinced that their victims are disposable. Leave your comment below and share your thoughts about how society can better protect vulnerable individuals from those who would exploit their desperation and trust. If you enjoyed this tale of systematic murder on the American frontier and want more horror stories from America's dark past, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries that reveal the darker aspects of human nature. See you in the next video.